When did you realize you were privileged? Story 1. When I was confused about people on Maury complaining their spouse was at the club, I couldn't figure out what type of country club would let people like that through the front security gate. Reply 1. I grew up in a trailer park. My wife's job requires her to go to galas to rub elbows with extremely rich donors. Each professor and their spouse is seated at a table with 8 of these donors, and the university parades around their accomplishments as everyone eats dinner. The comments they made were brutally out of touch with us common folk. It's like they were at a zoo, and I just had to smile and nod at them. Now, not all comments were as bad as this example, but it stands out. One of the foreign students was getting his doctorate. Now, this kid was a professional back in his home country of Venezuela, had a career and was very successful. Gave his speech in a very thick accent because English is his second language. Here are some of the comments at my table alone. Oh, I'm so happy you guys helped that poor boy escape his country. He did so well up there. He's come a long way. What a sweet little Mexican boy. Took everything in my power not to correct them. He was a Venezuelan. He is already successful. He knows more languages than you. But nope, I had to sit there and feed their hero complex about how they donated to help the poor boy from some Mexican country. Again, not all comments they were making were this egregious, but there was some definite disconnect. I imagine he would be one of the people that wasn't allowed in the club. Story 2. At this point, I already knew I was very well off. But after I had gotten laid off for the first time a few years ago, I took a break for about a month before diving into a job search. I was at the self-checkout at the grocery store next to a woman paying with food stamps. I had recently gotten $100,000 from my grandmother's inheritance, and it hit me. I'm unemployed, not even trying to find a job, and I just got a boatload of money because somebody else died. And she's the one people think is the freeloader. Reply 1. Different situation. But I thought something similar when I was in graduate school. I realized that despite my thousands of dollars of debt to get my degree, I'd still have the luxury of getting a loan unrelated to education if I needed one, and would still be approved for housing. People living on the street wouldn't be given a first thought, let alone a second, despite technically having more money than me, balance of $0 versus $100,000. It doesn't make any logical sense. Also, consider that panhandling is a job. It's the same job that most university presidents have. The only difference is that the presidents ask for money in fancy suits. Reply 2. I often respond to the question, what would you change about this world, or what should AI solve? With a very simple solution. Make it so that people actually get paid relative to the value they add to this world. I bet there are McDonald's burger flippers that have added more value than many millionaires. I hope society can get to that point. I also hope that we get smart enough and organized enough to really question why we still store our value in our government's currency when they are clearly horrible at managing it and they don't deserve it. It's like we are paying a mob boss for a service we don't actually know what we are getting for it. Reply 3. You. I appreciate you. I'm 43 and grew up in rural Illinois. We were your typical poor white redneck family. But all in all, I had great parents and extended family. But there was a recession going on at that time, and it hit our region hard. So many families like ours had nothing coming out of the Vietnam War. When I was very young, we were on food stamps. That wasn't our worst years. That was just before I was born. I was an oops baby born many years after my siblings. Before I came along, my siblings had to wear their snowsuits indoors in the winter because the rental house they lived in didn't have insulation in the walls. They also have a love-slash-hate relationship with strawberries because my mom's little garden, a major source of our food, grew tons of them, so they had to eat them in every form, every single meal, every day for years and years. To this day, I personally have trouble liking anything strawberry-flavored. My adult nephew made a comment to me yesterday about how I was the privileged sibling. I pointed out that he heard this said about me by his dad, aunt, and uncle growing up because I had a TV in the house and got to have some toys by the time I was a preteen. Still poor, but my parents had finally gotten decent paying jobs by the time I was 10 or so I got spoiled by having new clothes from Walmart instead of from the church donations box. The trade-off, of course, was that I was a latchkey kid because they worked all the time, so I never got to have family meals, or any time with family really, as my siblings were now out of the house and I never saw my parents. He had that OMG moment that hit him like a freight train when he realized it all. To them, I was spoiled because they were jealous they didn't have fancy foods like Kraft mac and cheese growing up. Anyways, now as an adult we are all middle class. Except for one brother who's a screw-up, but still doing okay. I have an absolute love of folks like you who have empathy and a serious hatred for those of privilege who see themselves as better than others. It warms my heart to see someone like you. Reply 4. I love my boyfriend, but he's like this, before you realize, and I don't think he realizes how privileged he is/was. In contrast, I grew up as a broke immigrant and my parents worked their way up to middle class. He quit his job in September of last year and still hasn't landed a new one. Not due to no offers, but rather because he's very picky with what jobs he's interested in. He went to an academic high school where everyone was affluent and they even had neurobiology courses and a med student track and thinks that's the norm for high schools in the US. There are other things too that really scream that he's privileged, and the only time I've gotten upset with him is when it's clear he doesn't truly understand how privileged he actually is, but I'm working on it. Story 3. My parents are wealthy, but I grew up in a place where many of my peers' parents were super duper crazy wealthy, so I had a really skewed understanding of wealth. It was really eye-opening for me when I went to college. I didn't have to take out student loans, my parents were able to just pay for it. But I had friends who, even with financial aid, had to work their butts off year-round to cover the cost of school. I realized pretty quickly just how privileged I was, and that I did in fact grow up with wealth. Reply 1. I went to a college where most of everyone had their parents pay for school. I had a scholarship and loans to be there, and I also had to work to afford things the rest didn't cover. People were always surprised when I had to go to work and not go out and do fun stuff. Like they couldn't comprehend the idea of it. It made me sad. I always felt like they judged me a little. Not sure if they did or not, but it didn't feel great. Reply 2. I met some people from Hong Kong who were in my university residence in the mid-70s. These kids were putting down roots in Canada, and the plan was for them to play a role in moving the family's generational wealth from Hong Kong. They were planning ahead for when the British lease on Hong Kong ended in 1997 and it reverted to the PRC. These people had no interest in having their wealth become absorbed by the Communist Party. The kids I knew bought mind-boggling stereo equipment and drove cars that looked like concept cars. Their watches looked too large for their wrists, and they often had really nice heavy gold necklaces. They thought nothing of renting a place off campus for weekend parties. That was wealth to me, but expected perks for them. I never mentioned how their easy ways with money quietly blew my mind. Reply 3. I went to a similar university. The first year was wild. Like, you're telling me AP classes are a real thing and not just a thing they made up for coming-of-age movies? Same with boarding schools where high school-age kids stay overnight? Y'all knew what a master's degree is this whole time, and I've never been told of their existence. Reply 4. What was interesting for me was that I did go to public school. But because I came from a wealthy area with really well-funded schools, my high school experience was sometimes more comparable to that of classmates who went to private school, with the exception that my high school had significantly more students than any private school I've heard of. But I think you bring up another good point, which is understanding of academia and graduate degrees that you can gain from your parents. Both my parents have graduate degrees, so I had a lot more knowledge and confidence navigating academia, both with applying to college or grad school and interacting with professors and academic systems. Again, I feel so privileged and lucky to come from this background, but I also realize how biased this system is towards people like me, and how there needs to be structural change to make it so anyone can enter and navigate academia with ease. Reply 5. My dorm roommate had your college experience, and she would say the most dense things to me. Oh, I wish I had time for a job too. Dude, we have the same amount of classes. My mom still hasn't paid me back for the coat I bought myself. Bitch, I had to work. I was so super jealous her parents paid to move and board her horse near campus. They lived 8 hours from it. She never went to see him ever. Now I had a horse too, but it wasn't because we had money. She was free and I worked extremely hard to pay for her both at a job and in barn work where I kept her. I would have done some super shady stuff to have her nearby, but that's really expensive and most barns don't let you work there for board. Reply 6. I went to do a master's degree in Boston. You had to pay the full tuition before the course started, so I just asked my dad for whatever thousands of US dollars the school cost. Plus I had to show to the US government that I had the money for rent. plus expenses for the whole year, locked up in my bank account for at least 6 months before that. When I came to the US, it was crazy to see that most of the American students had taken a $100K student loan to be able to pay for a master's degree, and they were surprised that the foreign students just paid out of pocket. I also told my very white American friend that I had never ever been discriminated against in the US, to which he responded, "Senior, you are white, have more money, and are more educated than 90% of Americans." Story 4. When I was a kid, my best friend came to our house for the first time, and he kept saying, "Wow." He was really impressed that we had 2 TVs. It embarrassed me enough that I didn't tell him we had 4. Reply 1. Growing up in Southern Africa in the 1980s, if you had a color TV and a VCR or a swimming pool at your home, you must have basically been royalty. My family were absolutely the commoners, with none of the above. Reply 2. Yeah, mine was similar. We had very high ceilings, and some of my friends came over and just kept staring upwards in awe and saying over and over how nice my house was. I felt kind of embarrassed for never putting it together before then. I was 17 at the time. Reply 3. I had a similar friend who was impressed we had 2 floors. Once I went to her house, I understood better. I had no clue 5 people could live in a 2-bedroom house, nor that a closet could be a bedroom for a small child. Someone was also a hoarder, or maybe they just couldn't afford trash bags, I don't know. Reply 4. One of my friends confused me by referring to my childhood home as a mansion. I am still not sure that's 100% accurate, but with the benefit of hindsight, I can tell it's significantly bigger than average. I can genuinely say that when I went over to my friends' houses, it did not occur to me to compare or even think about their sizes, which again is probably a symptom of privilege. Reply 5. This is it. My family aren't by any means rich, but we've never gone without anything we've wanted. Growing up, I was always considered the spoilt kid to the point where I used to get embarrassed about it. I'd hide my mobile phone, etc. I remember walking to the field with 2 friends when my brand new Nokia 3510 I started ringing, and I was so flustered and embarrassed to answer it. My sister, however, used to post pictures on social media of her new gadgets. Story 5. I took my friend to my parents' cabin and he said, "Wow, this is nicer than my house." Reply 1. I was invited to stay at a friend's cabin for a couple of nights. I expected a small building with 3 rooms. It was a 3-story house, probably about 6,000 square feet. The master bedroom was about the size of the living room in my home. Reply 2. The first time I ever got invited to someone's lake house, I was a kid, and this is what it was like. Roomy, swanky, nicer than where I lived. I thought that's what lake houses were and was so surprised to hear middle-class people talk about having one. I think I was an adult before I sorted this out, and realized that a lot of people's lake houses were fairly rustic little cottages with few amenities and furnished with hand-me-downs from their primary residence. Reply 3. Yeah, I'm from Brooklyn and I grew up in a house. My dad was a janitor/custodian and never went to college, so I never thought we were particularly well off. But my dad was frugal and good with money, and so we had a house and a country house in upstate New York. None of it was too fancy or anything. We closed the house upstate in the winter because it was too expensive to heat, etc. But when I got into middle school, I would go to my friends' places and they had apartments with mattresses on the floor. I remember inviting someone to my upstate house once and they didn't even know what I meant. That was my moment. Reply 4. I remember when my husband, then boyfriend, told me his parents were building a cabin. I was expecting a cabin, went out there, and there was one of those 2-story fireplaces centered in a wall of windows towards the lake. Steam shower, granite countertops, double wall ovens, heated bathroom floors, a massive workshop with a welding station, private dock with pontoon boat, etc. I still can't quite believe it when we go there. Story 6. Realizing how having my college tuition covered by my parents put me so much farther ahead than everyone else in the long term. Reply 1. I was the friend who needed financial aid, loans, etc. in college. I had a best friend who was like this and had everything covered. We lived together out of college. I remember when I needed to buy a new car immediately after graduation for my first job. I sat there after it was all said and done and said to her, "Whoa, I now have $65K in debt between this car and school." Chump change compared to others. She, whose parents paid for her car and school, looked at me and said, "You did this to yourself." I will never forget how that made me feel. Reply 2. My parents were prepared to 100% cover my college experience, and I did get a family car to drive for about 8 months after graduation. I don't think I could still be friends with that person after her statement, "No, I did this for myself and my future." Reply 3. I remember coming out of university with an engineering degree that I paid for on my own, with minimum wage jobs and student loans. Most of my peers had parents who were engineers and came from much wealthier families than mine. I was struggling financially with a car that was always breaking down, and $40 to see me from paycheck to buy food. I complained that I had to do a repair on my car and one of my only pairs of nice pants ripped in the crotch. One of my fellow engineers in training goes, "That's when you have to go to the bank of mom and dad." I don't have a bank of mom and dad, asshole. My parents live in a double-wide manufactured home on a rented pad. I didn't grow up with a heated pool and everything paid for. Of course, I didn't say that. Just nodded and kept silent. Reply 4. This is how my wife and my best friend / roommates in college figured out they were wealthy. My roommates all were in programs or paid internships that gave them a leg up in their career when they graduated. One day we were talking about it and they asked why I wasn't there myself. I told them I had to have a job in order to pay for rent and food, and I still had student loans. Years later, we are still buddies, and they've all commented how they had no idea how lucky they had it and how much respect they have for me for working my way through college. My wife, who was my girlfriend in college, was the same way. Once we were married, we were going over all of our finances, and she saw my student loans and credit card bill. At first, she was a little upset at the credit card bill and didn't understand why I didn't just pay down the balance each month. I told her it was because I had to do what I had to do to make ends meet. I wasn't getting any financial support from my parents. She realized that, though her parents weren't just giving her money every month, they were compensating her for good grades throughout her entire life, from grade school through graduate school. She also had her parents' card that she would use for gas and emergencies. She didn't realize how much that all adds up, though. She is an absolute gem, though, and her parents really taught her how to be financially independent and healthy. So we both tackled getting my credit cards paid off first, then worked hard to pay off my student loans so that we had zero debt. But she had a newfound respect for her parents and what they did for her, and her peers like myself who were not as fortunate. Reply 5. I had a couple of friends in college who just could not understand that I had to pay for my college by myself. My parents couldn't and wouldn't take out loans to help me, and federal aid wouldn't allow me to take out my own loans, at least enough to cover tuition, until I was 25. I was working like 35 hours a week and somehow still doing well in school until I had to drop out. One of the friends said they were paying for school by themselves, and I asked how. They said it was from an account their parents put money into for chores. $80K is not chores money and your parents are still paying for your schooling. Reply 6. I had the same situation. I didn't grow up with money, but my mom's business took off right around when I started college. I got a partial academic scholarship which helped, but it didn't cover books or housing, etc. My mom made sure I didn't have to worry about student loans through my 3.5 years, and I graduated debt-free. My partner and several friends of mine were not so fortunate and now have a student loan debt cloud hanging above them. I cannot fathom trying to save for a house or afford rent when hundreds a month are being siphoned to pay student loans. Story 7. Becoming an adult and realizing that I have extremely good role models as parents because when they have disagreements, they talk them out, and I have never ever heard them argue or badmouth each other. I also realized that as a kid, my parents got me mental health help that I needed, even though it was expensive, and continued that care for as long as I have needed it. A third one that doesn't seem like much, but has had a huge impact, was being taught financial literacy from a young age, to budget my money and only buy the things I really want. Reply 1. Wow, I relate to your comment a lot. I'm in college and I was shocked at first by how many people disliked or hated their parents or families. In my first semester, I called my mom like twice a day just while walking to class and such, and I met people who literally never talked to their parents. I also met people who had what I would consider abusive parents because they would relay stories about their mom hitting them and acting like it was totally normal and okay. Makes me really grateful for my parents. Reply 2. Yeah, I only talk to my mother once every few months. My wife talks to her mother several times a day. As for my dad, when I was 11, he woke me up by kicking me in the ribs. Then, he picked me up by my neck and slammed me against the wall. As I was losing consciousness, I felt a sharp pain and a popping sound in my left ear. He had slapped me and ruptured my eardrum. Fortunately, it healed on its own. My crime? A straw wrapper had fallen in the yard from the trash bag as I took it to the dumpster the night before, and I didn't see it because it was dark. I was insanely jealous of my friends who had good parents. They couldn't wait until their dad got home to take them fishing, camping, or tossing a ball around. Meanwhile, I'm hoping my dad gets in a car crash and dies. My mother finally divorced him when I was 13. I haven't spoken to him in decades. Reply 3. The first time I heard my parents screaming at each other was when I was about 3. 4 years old, a few years before they separated and divorced. I remember I was under the dining room table, scared craplessy out of my mind. Then, when I was in 5th grade, there was some miscommunication one Friday, and my mom came to pick me and my sister up from school when it was supposed to be my dad's weekend to have visitation rights for me. And he had also shown up at the school. In front of everyone, they began having a screaming match at each other. And in the end, my dad took me while my mom took my sister home. Of course, my sister and I saw each other again the following Monday when we returned to school. But that incident was ingrained into our memory. Those incidents really affected how I viewed relationships. I didn't think there was such a thing as a stable relationship because of them, or that it was possible to have an adult disagreement without a screaming match. My mom also constantly bad-mouthed my dad up until the day he died from a car accident. After he died, she acted like she was never verbally abusive towards him. And instead of letting me call my dad by dad the entire time he was alive when I was in her presence, she wanted me to refer to him by the Vietnamese word for that bastard. She would hound me about what he fed my sister and me when we were over at his house every other weekend. And if it wasn't to her satisfaction, she would call him up and leave verbally abusive voicemails. My dad always ignored her calls, I think, because he always knew how it was going to go with her. Reply 4. When I first started to date my wife, we had a disagreement. She started yelling and picked up something and threw it at me. I immediately stopped focusing on what the argument was about and calmly told her that if she threw anything else, it would be over. Her family had some problems, and she had just gotten out of an abusive relationship and just looked at me like a deer in the headlights. She did not throw anything else that day or any other. Later, she confided in me that she just thought about how couples fought, and at first, she could not even process me speaking in a calm voice during the argument. Story 8. I have an uncle who has money. I was a wild madman of a kid, had a lot of psychological stuff going on, and had lots of legal issues from the time I was really young, from 11 onwards. I spent about 10 years going in and out of juvie and jails and had a bunch of court cases. Every time I was in court, I had a private lawyer, and these lawyers would fight for me. You could not violate my rights because my lawyer would make a scene about it. You could not attempt to intimidate me into a plea deal, regardless of whether I even did something or if it was one of the cases where I was falsely accused, because my lawyers would fight right back and challenge the prosecutor to take it to trial, and then the prosecutor would generally give up because they knew that they couldn't actually prove that particular allegation. The reason that I didn't end up in prison, despite my various attempts to, is because of the lawyers. My uncle also paid a lot of money to get me into treatment programs or rehab, put me into a really good school, got me counselors, got me everything I needed, and he saved my life, and I turned out to be just a normal, chill person by my early 20s. I met so many people in the system who will never have any of that, people who need help and who will never receive it. The system does nothing in terms of root causes of criminality. It does nothing to prevent recidivism. It does nothing. The court is nothing but a chess game on a conveyor belt, and people get screwed over every day. I'd also like to point out that I'm not disparaging public defenders. There are many passionate public defenders who do excellent work, but their caseloads are too damn big. They cannot allocate endless time to a person's case because they don't have the time. Public defense needs way more funding than it gets. Reply 1. It sounds like you have grown up, and I hope you are using your paid-for freedom to help others who don't have that kind of luxury in their lives. As you learn through your experiences, there's an extreme amount of unfairness and injustice in the system. The public defense really needs more help. Thank you for turning your life around. I hope the best for you. And I'm not talking about materialistic bestness. I'm talking about what money cannot buy. Reply 2. Thanks. Though I don't know if we should call it growing up. I had to be open enough to grasp help, but it was very much to do with the resources which were made available to me. I don't think that I would have ended up in the same place by myself. I was a really angry kid and I didn't actually know why. The resources helped me figure it out. A lot of people in these situations might slow down later in life, but they don't actually grow up in a healthy way. Things remain within them, and things remain unresolved. There are organizations that I'm involved in and am able to support. Reply 3. My friend's brother was exactly like you, and her family had the same resources. But one judge decided to make an example out of him and sentenced him beyond what the prosecutor even suggested. It was terrifying to see how the system can screw someone based on one man's whim even with all the resources. How does a poor minority stand a chance? Also, that long sentence offered no rehabilitation, and he came out so much worse than he went in. The judge also decided to put him in a higher security prison than called for, and deliberately hours further away from his family. Again, luckily my friend has the resources to afford to visit him, but most people don't. Reply 4. In my humble opinion, there is a little ray of hope there. Where I live, they have something called drug court. It is where people who do something and have substance abuse or mental health problems, and a child can opt to get into this program. They are typically very poor and have everything from rehab, therapy, financial coaching, parenting classes, and everything else to try and get them on their feet. Not everyone makes it, but a good percentage do and start being non-offending, productive people who are much happier and can care for their kids. If I had any pull, they would have them everywhere. It is a no-brainer in the results. Story 9. Every summer, I went to 8 weeks of an overnight camp or some other cool summer program, 30-day bus tour across Western U.S., 3 weeks in Australia. I had no idea what those cost at the time. Reply 1. I aggressively sold thousands of Girl Scout cookies for 5 years straight, so every summer I could go to camp for free. It was a life lesson on how to be a cute kid and dominate the rich people's grocery store mercilessly. In my final year, the Girl Scout leaders of my cadet troop took all the money and ran D, but I still got to go to camp and backpacking for 2 weeks for free. Story 10. I was going to say I realized how privileged I was when I spent a summer with my great-grandmother in a small village in rural Hungary. No indoor running water. The only phone was at the church, and everyone came out to touch the rental car we drove there. This was in the late 1980s. But after reading some of the comments on here, I feel poor again. Reply 1. I host high school exchange students. My first one was from a rich family in Mexico. When he saw my 2000 SKU-effed house, his first words were, "My bedroom back in Mexico is bigger than your entire house." My next student was from Brazil. He was government-sponsored. He grew up in a dirt-floor, one-room house with 3 generations of his family. His first words were, "Why are houses here so big?" I still keep in touch with the Brazilian student, not the Mexican one though. When he got back to Mexico City, his father bought him a restaurant so that he would have something to fall back on if his planned NFL career never took off. The kid was 17 years old. Reply 2. I had the same experience in the late 1980s with my grandparents, but in a small farming village in Croatia. Although the electricity had been connected before we arrived, they had no money for any luxuries like a washing machine, etc. No running water, a well out the front, and no bathroom. We didn't have a hired car, but everyone thought we were millionaires based on the clothes and items we came with and based on our stories of what we had at home, TVs and washing machines. Story 11. I don't really come from wealth, just solidly upper middle class, but as part of my job, I do home visits and have many clients who are poor. When I first started my career in my 20s, I was shocked to discover there were people in the U.S. who lived in homes with no indoor plumbing or electricity, with dirt floors or had outdoor kitchens, not like a barbecue setup, like there was no kitchen inside where they lived, so they had to cook on an oil drum outside. I had no idea. Reply 1. A guy I used to work with, and who was younger than me, grew up in Alaska in a town near the Klondike where the only building in town with indoor plumbing was the school. He didn't have electricity in his house. I'm 43, and this was 12 years ago that I worked with him. This guy was an IT expert, and he was good at his job. I can't imagine how talented he would have been if he'd been raised with power and a network in his house from the time he was young. Reply 2. Semi-related. My mom was a principal in a low-income area. She had a student who only used to come to school every other day. She was getting ready to discipline him for excessive absences and called him in to find out what was going on. Turns out, he and his brother had to share one set of clothes, and they took turns going to school. This was probably 40 years ago, but I think about that a lot, and how many other kids have had to do something similar. Reply 3. Our schools are full of men and women who see cases like this every year and solve them, to the best of their abilities, out of their own pockets. And then so many of our citizens start with, "We don't need to give them raises. The union is getting greedy." The union bosses might be, but pay the damn teachers and make school lunch free already. It's shameful that the phrase school lunch debt exists.
Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a similar story to these that you want to share with us, please leave it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.